Okay, I'm going to give some introductory comments. Welcome to the Office of Tax Appeals. We're here for the hearing in the appeal of Jason Wicklund and Agnes Tam, which is Office of Tax Appeals, or OTA case number 2308-13998. Today is March 19th, 2025, and it is 2:19 p.m. As a reminder, OTA is not a court. It is an administrative tribunal staffed by subject matter experts and is completely independent of the state's tax agencies. This hearing is being conducted online by a panel of three. My name is Michael Geary, and I will take the lead in conducting the hearing today. I am joined, excuse me, on the panel by Erica Parker and Shireen Reidenauer. After the hearing, the panel will discuss the arguments and the evidence, and each of us will have an equal voice in those discussions. A decision on an issue is made when at least two of us agree. Any member of the panel may ask questions or otherwise participate in today's hearing to ensure that we have all the information we need to correctly decide the appeal. Consistent with OTA's goal to be completely open and transparent, today's hearing is being seen and heard live and in its entirety on OTA's YouTube channel. The YouTube recording of the hearing will remain available to be viewed online for some period of time. In addition, a stenographer is helping us to make a record of this hearing. We will all help our stenographer by speaking slowly and clearly and by not interrupting another speaker. Later, a written transcript of the hearing will be available on OTA's website. Ms. Alonso, let's start our record. And I will begin by asking the parties to identify themselves by stating their names and who they represent, beginning with appellants.
This is Thomas Michel representing appellants.
Thank you. Respondent.
This is Vivian Ho, along with my co-counsel, Maria Brosterhouse, for respondent.
Thank you. And it's my understanding, Mr. Michel, that Mr. Wicklund will be testifying today. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. Will respondent be calling any witnesses today?
No witnesses, thank you.
All right, thank you. The exhibits marked for identification in this appeal consist of appellants' exhibits marked 1 through 5 for identification and respondents' exhibits marked A through N for identification. The parties provided copies of the exhibits to each other and to OTA, and those were incorporated into an electronic hearing binder, which should be in the possession of the parties. Let me ask you first, Mr. Michel, has appellant confirmed that appellant's exhibits incorporated into the binder are complete and as legible as the ones you submitted?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. And has the respondent also done that?
Yes.
Thank you. The parties were instructed to state objections to the proposed evidence in writing, and neither party has done that. But appellant disclosed proposed exhibits 4 and 5 late, so I will give FTB an opportunity to state objections to those documents now. Does respondent have any objection to the admission of appellant's exhibits 1 through 5?
No objections.
Thank you. Does appellant have any objection to the admission of respondent's exhibits A through N?
No objections.
Thank you. All of those exhibits are now admitted into OTA's record. It has been agreed by the parties that the sole issue to be decided in this appeal is whether appellants are entitled to abatement of the late payment penalty in the amount of $1,968.14. Mr. Michel, do you agree that that is the issue that is being submitted to OTA or will be submitted to OTA for consideration?
That's correct.
Ms. Ho, do you also agree?
Yes.
Thank you. As discussed during our pre-hearing conference, it was agreed that appellants would have 20 minutes for its opening statement, for their opening statement and witness examination. Respondent requested and will be given 10 minutes for its only argument, and appellants will have roughly 5 minutes for closing remarks. Appellants may structure the testimony and argument components of their opening presentation however they wish, and we'll begin with that in just a minute. But first, let me ask if there's any questions from the parties or their representatives about how we're going to be proceeding today. Seeing none, I'll begin by administering an oath to Mr. Wicklund. Mr. Wicklund, would you raise your right hand, please? And tell me when you've done that, because your picture is not currently displayed on my screen.
I have done that.
Okay, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You can put your hand down. And Mr. Michel, you can begin with your presentation. I don't know if you intend to offer some argument first, but you could, like I said, you can structure your presentation any way you want, and you can begin now.
Thank you, Judge. The appellants will start their presentation with a question and answer segment as the testimony from Mr. Wicklund. Now, Mr. Wicklund, how long have you been paying California taxes?
I've been paying California taxes since 2015.
And what method did you use to pay California taxes before the 2021 tax year?
I use the online payment system. I just haven't had checks or used checks for a very long time.
Okay. And have you ever had any issues scheduling those payments through FTB WebPay before 2021 tax year?
Never. This is the first time.
And when did you first try to pay your taxes for 2021?
It was on April 15th.
Okay, and how do you normally input your banking information to do that?
Well, I have my account number memorized, so that may not be very standard. But I usually just Google search the routing number for Chase Bank. So it's just as simple as Google search Chase routing number, add that in, copy paste it in, and then I type in my account number.
All right, thank you. And then did you pay the IRS at the same time you paid your state liability?
I did.
Okay, and when you entered your banking information into FTB WebPay and submitted it, was there any screen or notice suggesting that anything had gone wrong with your scheduled payment?
Nope, nothing at all.
And would you have expected some kind of notice like that?
I would have, yeah. I would assume that their bill pay system would probably be like any other, where when I make an online purchase or a debit, that it not allow me to submit essentially if there's going to be any kind of error in one of the payment fields.
All right, thank you. And then after that day, did you receive anything else from the FTB suggesting that the payment had been successful?
I think it was about 2 weeks later, I received a written notice.
And what did that notice say?
I actually brought it with me. It says, while you received this notice, you recently made an estimated tax or extension payment for more than $20,000. And then it continues to go on. And then it basically mandates that moving forward, I'll have to use the electronic payment system. So it says, because I now meet the requirements for future payments to be done electronically.
And how did you interpret that notice when you first got it?
Yeah, I mean, I just assumed that this was just further confirmation that they received my funds, asking me to make future payments electronically. Yeah, to me, this was just kind of validation.
All right. And then when did you learn after that the FTB had not actually received your scheduled payment?
They sent a letter, I think it was postmarked the end of June. We got it the very first week of July, sharing that the payment was delinquent.
And then after you received that notice, when did you pay the FTB?
As soon as possible. When we got the notice, we called FTB first to find out what was happening because it's quite confusing to get a delinquency. to find out why there's a penalty, what we're supposed to do for next steps. And we were informed to make the payment, including the penalty payment, which we did promptly. And then we started the appeals process.
Now, taking a step back to when you actually input that information the first time, Exhibit O shows from the FTB shows that a different routing number was used for your first scheduled payment compared to your last scheduled payment. Do you know how that could have happened?
No idea. The best solution I can come up for is like when you Google search Chase Bank routing number, maybe it defaults to the state that your IP address is currently in. When I asked Chase Bank about like if that would matter, the feedback I got is it shouldn't matter because the routing number will always bring you back to the bank. It's the account number that's most important. So yeah, I had no expectation from this that like the FTB would not be attempting to take the funds, more or less. So
Okay, and then do you know if you used that same routing number to pay your federal tax liability?
I did, and that's the confusing thing is it's a copy and paste exercise for me. So when I'm making both those payments, I'm also pulling in the same routing number for the federal IRS as I was for California.
And then was there any issue with that payment to the IRS?
There was not.
All right, well, thank you. Those were all my questions for Mr. Wicklund, so I will move on to my argument. After just 1 second, sorry. First, I would like to thank the OTA judges for hearing this appeal today.
Mr. Michaud, let me just interrupt you for a second,
yeah,
if
sure.
I may. Do you want the panel or FTB to ask questions of the witness now, or is it your preference that the questions for the witness be reserved until you give your argument?
The questions could be presented now.
All right. Let me first ask FTB. Ms. Ho, do you have any questions for the witness?
Yes. Mr. Wicklund, you testified that you obtained your routing information by Googling. Did you obtain an official source for your routing number from your bank's website or other sources that's affiliated with the bank?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking. I don't know what the source was at the time. I just know that the routing number worked for the federal payment, but not the California payment.
And you mentioned that you confirmed with a banker that both routing numbers will work. Did you confirm at the time you made the payment, or was it a confirmation you made for your appeal?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that again? It got a little bit quiet.
Sure. You said that you confirmed with a banker at your financial institution that either routing number would have worked. Did you confirm for this appeal, or did you confirm at the time you made the payment with a banker that either routing numbers would work?
No, I just confirmed it after we received the evidence, and I don't know what document you provided recently about what routing numbers were used, and like that there was a difference in routing numbers, and so this was a question I just asked between last week and this week of our personal banker of does it impact? I don't know if that answers your question. I apologize.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Let me ask my co-panelists. Ms. Parker, do you have a question?
I have no question at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Redenauer, do you have any questions?
I just want to clarify the record, Ms. Michael. Were you speaking about Exhibit N as opposed to Exhibit O?
Oh, yes, I apologize. That is Exhibit N.
Okay. I'm going to hold off my questions for this moment. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think I might just ask a question or two now, Mr. Wicklund. Looking at Exhibit N, it looks like there was, there were other uses by you of the web page system. In addition to the one that failed on April 15th, 2022, there was one that was successful, it looks like, on July 6th, 2022. And there was another one that was successful on August 6th, 2022. And those two use a different routing number. How did you get the routing numbers when you made those payments?
Yeah, thanks, Your Honor. It's the same process for me. The Google search. I can't explain the differences other than I know I was in Washington State for one payment, and I know I was here in California for the summer payments, or vice versa. So I don't know if that provides any clarity to the panel.
Do you mean that you were in the state of Washington when you did the Google search? Is that what you're saying?
That's my only possible explanation is the IP address is in Washington, and so the preemptive response is going to be based on the state I'm in. But this is just me kind of guessing how Google's working behind the scenes.
When you use the web-based system for FTB, when you used it at the time of the failed payment in April of 2022, was there any information provided to you, the user, regarding verification, a need for verification to make sure that the electronic transfer in fact took place?
Do you mean some kind of submission acceptance page?
Something to tell you, some script to tell you that you should be diligent to make sure that your bank actually transferred the money after you completed the online work.
Yeah, Your Honor. The carefully selected language, I think, has become more clear and evident, after the fact. But at the time, when making the payment, there was no suggestion to me that my payment wasn't being accepted.
Tell me about this language that has become more clear and evident to you after the fact.
Well,
What is the language that you are thinking of when you say that?
Yeah, of course. I think it's the OTA, excuse me, or the Franchise Tax Board, and I apologize if I get this wrong. I think that during the appeals process, it's their argument that it's my responsibility to check my bank account to make sure that funds are withdrawn. And that is the language I'm thinking about, Your Honor.
What I was asking is if there was any language to that effect that was displayed on your screen at the time that you attempted to make the payment.
I see. I honestly can't recall.
Okay.
If I'm under oath, I can't recall.
All right. You don't use checks to make any payments of any kind?
The reason why I know my account number so well is I've had it since I was a teenager, and I used it to balance my checkbook and be diligent, but I think that I've just fallen into that trap of everyone else, and everything's electronic now. If I need a check nowadays, I have to go to the bank and ask for a check.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Wicklund. Those are the only questions I have at this time. Mr. Michelle, I suppose I should just make sure. Ms. Ho, any other questions for this witness?
No further questions. Thank you.
Ms. Parker, any questions for this witness?
No, I have no questions.
And Ms. Reidenauer, any questions?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Michelle, I think you can now resume your argument.
Judge, if I may I ask one more question of Mr. Wicklund in response to Ms. Ho's question?
Of course.
Mr. Wicklund, at the time that you first made that payment for the 2021 tax year, did you have any reason to confer with your banker whether or not using a different state's routing number would affect a payment?
No, I've never had this issue before.
All right, thank you. That was my only question.
All right, you may proceed with your argument.
Well, again, I would like to thank the OTA judges for hearing this appeal today. Now, this case is about responsible taxpayers who did their due diligence by paying their taxes on time or trying to, but are nonetheless facing penalties. I will discuss why the late payment penalty imposed on appellants should be abated due to reasonable cause under Revenue and Taxation Code Section 19132A1. Now, under this section, late payment penalty may be abated if failure to pay the tax was due to reasonable cause and not due to willful neglect. Willful neglect was defined in United States v. Boyle as a conscious, intentional failure or reckless indifference. According to case law, to establish that a failure to timely pay taxes was due to reasonable cause, the taxpayer must show that the failure occurred despite the exercise of ordinary business care and prudence. Now, Mr. Wicklund's testimony shows that appellants met the reasonable cause standard, and that they acted as an ordinarily intelligent and prudent business person would have in similar circumstances. First, the appellants had good compliance history. They followed a similar routine they had used in previous years, which had never before resulted in any issues, and they received no indication from their bank or the FTB that anything had gone wrong. Second, any suspicion appellants may have had about the FTB not securing their funds was precluded by the mandatory electronic payment notice sent to them by the FTB. To my first point, the appellants carefully calculated their tax liability for the 2021 tax year and ensured they deposited enough funds in their bank account to pay both their federal and state taxes. Once the appellants submitted their 2021 state tax return and entered their payment information into the FTB WebPay system, there was no indication that the FTB would not secure their funds exactly as they had in previous years. Respondent contends that, despite these facts, the appellants did not demonstrate ordinary business care and prudence because taxpayers are expected to monitor their their bank accounts. To support this assertion, the respondent cites appeal of Scanlon and appeal of Friedman. However, appellant's circumstances are unlike the circumstances in those cases. In Scanlon, the panel held that reasonably prudent taxpayers would monitor their bank account and quickly ascertain whether a payment was in fact made. But when exactly a taxpayer is expected to monitor their bank account is unclear. While immediately monitoring the account would be the most cautious approach, the panel in appeal of Morin held that the most cautious approach is not the only reasonable and prudent approach. In Scanlon, the taxpayers learned of their failed payment 8 months after the payment was due. Appellants here instead learned of their failed payment and promptly paid the amount due after about 2.5 months. Moreover, the taxpayer in Scanlon failed to show proper prudence because they entered an incorrect bank account number into FTB WebPay, a mistake they had made in a previous year as well. The appellants here made no such mistake, much less a repeat mistake. While appellants entered different routing numbers between their 2 payments, Exhibit 4 shows the routing number used for the April 15th payment is Chase Bank's correct California routing number. Although appellants' Chase Bank account was opened in Washington, appellants successfully identified Chase Bank with a correct routing number, and so they would have reasonably expected their payment to succeed. Exhibit 5, an email between appellant and his personal banker at Chase, shows that even a professional banker would have expected FTB to be able to secure the funds with any Chase Bank routing number. Further, since Mr. Wicklund is convinced he must have used the same routing number to pay his federal taxes, and there was no issue with that payment, there's likely some factual foundation to that belief. Therefore, appellants reasonably believed they did not enter any incorrect information into FTB WebPay, and so they showed the correct amount of prudence necessary to meet the reasonable cause standard. Respondents also rely on appeal of Friedman, where the panel held that the failure to timely remit the balance on a tax liability caused by an oversight does not by itself constitute reasonable cause. However, as I just explained, there was no oversight by appellants. Given the information appellants entered into FTB WebPay, any reasonably prudent business person would have expected the payment to go through. Additionally, there were other factors which indicated to appellants that there was no reason to check their bank account, which leads me to my second point. That less than 2 weeks after appellants' scheduled payment and before the end of the month, the respondent issued a mandatory electronic payment notice to the appellants. This e-pay notice listed 2 triggering conditions for why it was sent. The first, that you recently made an estimated tax or extension payment for more than $20,000. And then the second, that you filed a tax return with a total tax liability of over $80,000. Appellants had planned a payment of $30,634 and reported a tax liability of $105,178, meaning they expected to fall into both triggering conditions. Appellants interpreted this notice as evidence that their payment to the FTB had been successful, and so they had no reason to believe they needed to further ensure the FTB had secured their funds. Now, respondent contends that the e-pay notice is not relevant since appellants only fell into the second triggering condition relating to total tax liability, and that the notice was not meant to confirm a payment. However, a reasonable cause analysis only depends upon how a reasonable and prudent business person would have interpreted the notice, and not the reality of why it was sent. The notice clearly states that one of its triggering conditions is that a payment was made by the taxpayer. An ordinarily intelligent and prudent business person would understand that processing a payment is faster than processing a return. Therefore, the reasonable conclusion is that the FTB already knew whether the payment had failed when the notice was sent, even if only the second triggering condition was met. This reasonable assumption is supported by the reality of the events. Exhibit E shows respondent's system had already flagged appellant's payment as dishonored a day before the e-pay notice was issued. A taxpayer would find it entirely unlikely that the FTB would send a notice about how to pay future tax liability when it already knew that the payment for the current year had failed. In such a case, a taxpayer would expect to receive a similar notice at the time showing that their payment had failed. While cases such as Scanlon show that lack of notice from the FTB of a failed payment does not negate a taxpayer's duty of prudence and care to verify that a scheduled payment was successful, the circumstances here are different. In other similar cases, the taxpayer did not receive any notice from the FTB contemplating the status of their payment. Here, the timing and manner of the e-pay notice actively indicated to the appellants that their payment had been successful and that they could have expected other similar notifications if the FTB had not received their funds. Therefore, appellants had no reason to monitor their bank account closely for the relatively short 2.5-month period it took for them to receive a balance due notice. Once they learned the FTB had not secured funds out of their account, the appellants promptly paid their tax liability along with all calculated penalties. Given these facts, 1, that appellants had good reason to suspect their payment succeeded, and 2, that appellants reasonably believed they received confirmation of their payment, we respectfully request that the Office of Tax Appeals rule in appellants' favor and abate their late payment penalty along with any accrued interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michelle. I think that Judge Redenauer, you withheld questions earlier. Do you have any questions now for either Mr. Michelle or his witness?
I will wait until both parties present. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I have a question for you, Mr. Michelle. Do you agree that OTA cases basically state that a taxpayer has an obligation to verify that an electronic payment, in fact, is completed as part of that taxpayer's exercise of ordinary and reasonable diligence?
I do not believe that that previous cases have given that specific duty in all cases. I think reasonable cause standard calls for looking at all the facts and circumstances surrounding each case. And so like in this case where there are other facts and circumstances which would have led the taxpayer to not think they needed to look into their account, they can still meet that standard.
Does the Scanlon case, for example, indicate that the duty is created immediately upon regardless of what might happen later? Does the Scanlon case indicate that that duty exists immediately after the attempt to make a payment and continues until such time as that payment is confirmed?
I don't believe so, because it can take a day or two for a payment to even go through. So when a taxpayer is supposed to actually check their bank account, there doesn't seem to be any clear line of when they're supposed to do that.
Doesn't your argument, did you indicate that your client received the letter concerning electronic payments? How long? 12 days after, was it?
Yeah, about that, I think. Yeah.
So doesn't your argument basically say that no duty arises, even from the beginning, if a letter like that is sent to a taxpayer?
I believe that if a letter like that is sent within a relatively short period of time, it would indicate to the taxpayer that their payment went through and that there's no reason to look into their account.
Okay, so you are saying that if the taxpayer takes no action to confirm payment for 2 weeks, but receives a letter like the letter your clients received, that taxpayer's failure to confirm payment during that 2 weeks does not constitute negligence?
Yes, that would not constitute negligence.
Okay. Thank you.
I have some follow-up questions, Judge Geary, for that, please.
All right, go ahead, please.
That's is it Mr.
Michelle.
Thank you. You use a lot of words of expect, assume, but yet you've never talked about the duty to check, and yet you say payments are going to be made between 1 to 2 days, but then a notice sent 2 weeks thereafter is reasonable cause not to check it. And I'm trying to grasp the logic behind your argument. To assume things and to expect things does not sound very reasonable, yet alone to reach the reasonable prudent business person standard. So again, I'm trying really hard to understand your argument. So maybe you can narrow that down or address the expect, assume, 2 days versus 2 weeks difference, etc., please.
Yeah, so I would say that the actual standard for reasonable cause is what a reasonably intelligent and prudent business person would expect to do. The statute itself doesn't impose any duty to look into your bank account. So the actual standard is just what would that person do, and what that person would do has a lot to do with what they would expect.
So are you saying that it's not prudent to double check to make sure money has been withdrawn from your account? And also going along with Judge Geary's questions regarding our OTA presidential opinions that have touched on this?
I would go back to the holding in Morin, which is that the most prudent option is not the only prudent option. And so while immediately checking constantly after that payment is scheduled might be the most prudent option, it wouldn't be the only prudent option. And there are plenty of different ways that someone would look into whether or not a payment had gone through. Even if you would normally expect it to take 1 or 2 days, people sometimes wait till the end of the month to look over their transactions or anything like that. So I'm just arguing that there is no clear line when the taxpayer is supposed to look into their account.
Okay, thank you. No more questions, Judge Carey.
Thank you, Judge Ridenour. Ms. Ho, are you prepared to give your argument?
Yes, thank you.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Vivian Ho. I, along with my co-counsel, Maria Brosterhouse, represent respondent, the Franchise Tax Board. The issue presented before you today is whether appellants established reasonable cause for abatement of the late payment penalty for the tax year 2021. Because appellants failed to make their payment by the due date, respondent correctly imposed the late payment penalty. The late payment penalty may be abated if the taxpayer establishes that the late payment was due to reasonable cause. To establish reasonable cause, a taxpayer must show that the failure to timely pay occurred despite the exercise of ordinary business care and prudence. The burden of proof is on the taxpayer to show that reasonable cause exists to support abatement. Appellants have not established reasonable cause for abatement of the late payment penalty. Appellants assert they attempted to timely pay and were unaware that their payment attempt was unsuccessful. Under the Presidential Opinion of Appeal of Scallon, a taxpayer exercising due care and diligence is expected to monitor their bank account and quickly ascertain whether a scheduled electronic payment from their bank account to the FDB was successful. Appellants fail to monitor their bank account and quickly verify their payment, as it is not until almost 3 months after both the due date and their unsuccessful payment attempt that appellants paid their liability. It is also unclear how appellants did not realize that their attempted payment of over $30,000 was not deducted from their bank account. As such, appellants did not act with due care and diligence in fulfilling their tax payment obligations. Regarding appellants' assertion that their payment attempt was dishonored due to an unknown reason, FDB's records indicate that appellants' payment was unsuccessful due to appellants providing an incorrect routing number. As appellant testified, he did not obtain his routing number from his financial institution or any official source. Respondent's Exhibit N shows that while the account number for appellant's dishonored payment matches the account number for his successful payments, the routing number used for the dishonored payment does not match the routing number for the successful payments. As held in the Appeal of Friedman, a late payment due to a taxpayer's own oversight does not establish reasonable cause. Regarding appellants' assertion that they received notice from FDB confirming that their attempted payment was successful, appellants are mistaken. The FDB notice appellants provided on appeal is a mandatory e-pay notice. This is a general notice regarding a future e-pay requirement. As indicated on the notice, the e-pay requirement is triggered when the taxpayer either makes a payment of over $20,000 or files a tax return reporting over $80,000 in liability. Appellant filed their 2021 tax return on April 15, 2022, and they received this notice on April 28, 2022, after their return was filed because it reported a liability of over $80,000. The notice does not provide any type of confirmation that appellant's payment attempt was successful. Accordingly, as appellants have not established reasonable cause for their late payment, FDB respectfully requests appellant's claim for refund be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask my colleagues if they have any questions for you, Ms. Ho. Hearing Officer Parker, do you have any questions for respondent?
I have no questions.
Judge Ridenour, do you have any questions for respondent?
No questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Howe. Mr. Michelle, you can have up to 5 minutes or so for closing remarks if you would like to make some. Do you want to make some closing remarks?
Yes, please.
All right, you may proceed then.
Now, at every step, the appellants acted not only as an ordinarily intelligent and prudent business person would have, but I think as any respectable citizen would have. They thought they paid their taxes. Once they were notified otherwise, they promptly paid the full amount. Now, respondents' contention that appellants did not act reasonably simply because they did not check their bank account goes against the fact that a reasonable cause analysis takes into consideration all the facts and circumstances surrounding the failed payment. And therefore, it's whatever a reasonably intelligent and prudent business person would have expected under those circumstances. Appellants had no reason to check their bank account because, one, they scheduled their payment and they were given no indication that it had gone wrong. And two, because shortly thereafter, they received a notice which they reasonably interpreted as a confirmation of their payment. Now, given these facts, we again respectfully request that the Office of Tax Appeals rule in appellant's favor and abate their late payment penalty along with any accrued interest. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Michelle. Okay. Bear with me for a second. The case is concluded now. We've heard the testimony. We've heard the arguments of the parties. It is March 19th, 2025, 3:01 p.m. This case is deemed submitted now. The record is closed. I want to thank everyone for participating today. In the coming weeks, the panel will meet to consider the matter, and OTA will send a written opinion within 100 days of today's date. This hearing is now concluded. The next and final hearing on this afternoon's OTA calendar will begin at approximately 3:20 p.m. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.